Every class in League of Legends has gone through their own history of ups and downs, major reworks, overhauls, and everything else in between. With the game being routinely balanced every 2 weeks or so, there will always be periods of time where one class dominates over the other. One of the most common cycles being the ever-alternating support meta, with either tank supports or enchanted supports holding the lion's share of equity. Generally though, the balanced team makes an effort to ensure all classes have a modicum of relevance, even if ultimately one of them ends up being the more popular or practical one to play. The one class I would say remains the perennial exception to this would be tank champions. Due to a series of traumatic events, for lack of a better word, that happened in the first decade of League, tanks have consistently been the most difficult class to find a healthy middle ground for between being strong and viable enough to make players want to use them, but not too strong to where they stat check everyone. The very nature of the class makes achieving such a balance next to impossible in theory, as there are simply too many contradicting elements that circumstantially gatekeep the class, forcing Riot to try unconventional, if not outright counterproductive means of increasing the viability of tanks. The end result has given rise to a quasi-new generation of tanks, the Raidbosses, which I'll be talking about for today and how they represent the late-stage consequences of such experimentation. Briefly recapping what the challenge is in making tanks more viable, to put it simply, tanks are characterized by multiple things. The attribute in particular that truly encapsulates them though is the name itself, tank, also known as durability. Tanks are bar none the most durable champions in League, capable of withstanding immense amounts of enemy pressure for the benefit of their team. Other champions may have tons of crowd control in their kit, just as much if not more than tanks, but no champion ever measures up to the sheer resilience of a tank. That makes it their most distinguishing attribute. Why this presents an issue is that in order for a tank to qualify as such, they need to be bulky, and if you want to make a tank be capable of carrying games, they have to find a way to weaponize that bulk, which more often than not, boils down to being so bulky they can literally just brute force their way through a game. Such was the case during the infamous tank meta spanning 2015 through 2017, arguably the longest stretch of dominance from a single class in history. In fact, that tank meta is the reason why Riot's quicker on the draw to hotfix nerf champions are classes that come out a bit too strong. Another long-term consequence of the Season 5 through 7 tank meta was the progressive increase in universal tank busting measures. Beginning with champions, I would say around 2016 is when we started to see a growing frequency of new releases carrying innate tank busting in their kit. Cled's W and Ultimate both dealt max health damage, Camilla true damage on her Q, max health on her W, and current health on her Ultimate. Kane's Red form turned his Q and Ultimate into max health damage. Ornn, despite being a tank himself, ironically excelled at beating other tanks by way of the ample amounts of max health damage in his W and brittle procs. From that point onward, passive armor and magic penetration, percent health damage, whether current, missing, or max health, and true damage went from being spotted in 1 in every 10 champions to every 2 or 3 champions. It was a countermeasure to mitigate the possibility of such a meta ever happening again. Additionally, infrastructure has been put in place to afford any champion some semblance of a fighting chance against these brutes. 10 years ago, the only main tank busting items we had were Black Cleaver, Void Staff, and Last Whisper. Now we have a lot more. There are 2 types of crit chance armor pen items, LDR and Mortal Reminder. Black Cleaver is still around as per usual, but now we have Sorrelto's Grudge, a more assassin-oriented tank killing option. Blade of the Ruined King is still around of course, and they even made a tank busting option for on-hit effects in the form of Terminus. As well, Serpent's Fang was implemented as a means of countering shields, something many tanks carry. Grievous Wounds has also been made more plentiful than before. Back then, the only source of anti-heal you could buy was, I believe, Morellonomicon, and bear in mind, Oblivion Orb wasn't a thing back then. You had to buy the full item to get any source of anti-heal. Thornmail used to only be the recoil damage, not the wounds, and we didn't have Kempung Chainsword for a while either. Just recently in Season 16, they made the Bastion Breaker item, which can deal true damage to champions. Many more sources of tank busting are available now more than ever. Some might claim too many, and there's been empirical data to support that. Ever since the new decade rolled around, the tank class at large has been facing a steady decline in popularity over the years. Champions like Malphite, Sejuani, Nautilus Top, Tank Gragas and whatnot used to be among the most popular in the game. Nowadays, you rarely if ever come across them, and the main reason for that is they're just not that viable in the current day for climbing. Of course, everyone has that one game where the enemy tank feels like you can throw everything but the kitchen sink at them and they don't even drop under half HP. But most of the time, tanks carry a negative expected value. Damage has become too prevalent in this day and age that even tanks have trouble holding out for more than a few seconds. While it is a very straightforward problem, tanks not being tanky enough, the solution isn't as simple as just making them beefier. That would bring us back to the original concern of tanks being impossible to kill. At the same time, no other solution is any more appealing. Another defining property of most tanks is their heavy use of crowd control. The challenge of crowd control is that it cannot go past a certain line on general principle. What I mean by that is crowd control, being the great equalizer of the game, has to be handled carefully. If there's too much crowd control and or too available crowd control on a single champion, the game flat out becomes unplayable against them. Like imagine if a tank had 10 seconds of hard CC instead of the typical 2 or 3 you normally deal with. You just can't play the game at that point. You ever see those montages of max ability haste Gragas humping you to death? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Increasing a tank's durability isn't the solution because that's the whole reason they added so many anti-tank options to begin with. Likewise, giving a tank more crowd control is also a bad idea on account of there being no counterplay to getting chain stunned. What other option is left? That brings us to the title of the video. The thought process behind all tank busting is ultimately to do what? Kill tanks at a reasonable pace. Obviously without Black Cleaver, LDR, Blade of the Ruined King and such, you can still kill the enemy tank. It'll just take an inordinate amount of time and resources to do so, at which point you run the risk of the tank killing you before you can kill them. It's not that tanks did a lot of damage per se, more that you did no damage to them, allowing them more uses of their abilities to slowly but surely beat you down. Currently, we've been in the inverse situation where tanks are dying at a rate faster than the expected amount of ability rotations they get through. The only solution to this that doesn't involve making them beefier or giving them more crowd control is unfortunately damage. Fight fire with fire, giving rise to what are commonly referred to as raid bosses. You may have noticed a certain kind of tank champion that still gets played a decent amount right now, and they all kind of happen to lean into the same win condition of dishing out way too much damage despite being a tank. Now, while the 3 champions I have on the thumbnail share the same similarity, I do plan to include a certain piece of shit that's been dominating the meta for the past give or take 3 months. Let's talk about them though. Dr. Mundo, Sion, Cho'Gath, and in addition Skarner and Malphite. Besides Malphite, what do these champions all have in common? Well, actually they have multiple things, but what they're primarily known for is how big they get. Figuratively and literally, each of them are notorious for stacking massive amounts of health by way of their internal scaling and also frequently the usage of Heartsteel, a permanently stacking item that was introduced over 3 years ago. Yeah, if you thought you were getting old, Heartsteel came back in 2022, let that sink in for a moment. Oh my god, why is it 2026 already? Heartsteel is added to the game as a means of giving tanks the ability to scale better into the mid to late game. People tend to think tanks are weak early game and strong late game once they start getting bulky, but not quite. In the early game, tanks are weak, yes, but their strongest point is actually mid game 2 or 3 items in, because at that point their durability is starting to come online and most champions have not yet purchased a tank busting item or have their tank busting properties reach their full potential. By 4 or 5 items though, they fall off again since at that point everyone does so much damage their durability can't keep up. Heartsteel is brought in to remedy that by giving tanks the ability to increase their health pool in proportion to the opposition's ability to deal with it, and while that applies to anyone who builds this item even if it's a non-tank champion, these guys in particular have found a most unique way of weaponizing it, as they carry multiple sources of HP scaling in their kits. The highest profile example of this would have to be Dr. Mundo, by far the best abuser of Heartsteel owing to damn near everything in his kit getting stronger with more HP. He of course acquires the innate durability that comes with more health, but his passive regen goes up the more HP he has. The recast damage on his W goes up, not by much, but it can do a nice 300 or so damage in the mid to late game, so it's not negligible. He gets bonus AD equal to his max health, and then his E deals damage equal to his bonus health, effectively having double scaling. Ultimate gives him bonus health based on his missing health, which means it will give you more at higher amounts of HP obviously. Let's also not forget you have the max health regen to go along with it. Mundo gets beefier and more damaging by building HP, which prior to Heartsteel would eventually have reached a soft cap, not counting Grasp of the Undying and Overgrowth. But Heartsteel enables Mundo to become an infinite scaler and thus be one of the few tanks who can not only survive for more than a few seconds in the late game, but more critically have enough damage to run down your backline if you don't have an easy way of kiting him. Mind you, no matter how much extra health Mundo has, he still falls victim to high DPS enemy teams due to being all health and at most 1 armor or magic resist item. However, the real reason for people choosing him over most other tanks is because unlike most of those tanks, Mundo's DPS scales to a point where he begins to overpower DPS champions through sheer stats. In addition to Heartsteel accumulating bonus health, the item in and of itself does a ton of damage. No doubt you've seen plenty of clips of Mundo getting Heartsteel primed up with his E at low HP plus Grasp and Titanic Hydra active to straight up one-shot a squishy champion. Then again, it is more than just Heartsteel, there's Grasp, Titanic, maybe Overlord's Bloodmail and whatnot. But the point is, come late game, Mundo has all the durability of a tank while at the same time being a total menace to the enemy team. Worse yet, you have to 100 to 0 him, for if he gets a chance to run away from you, Warmogs will regen him back up to full in seconds, forcing you to have to fight him all over again, only now with all your cooldowns exhausted. Though statistically speaking, Mundo has a lower win rate than a conventional tank like Malphite, he has carry potential unless the enemy team is specifically geared to shut him down. The same applies to other members of this archetype. Look at Cho'Gath for example. I know Cho'Gath usually prefers to go AP Bruiser builds, not really Heartsteel, but the same principle is here nonetheless. He stacks up an overwhelming amount of bonus health to become the biggest champion in the game. Quite literally in this case, he gets bigger with every stack of feasts. If you go tank Cho'Gath, the guy becomes one of the hardest champions to take down, all while having really solid damage output for his supposed tank. The reason you built AP Bruiser on him is because of his AP ratios, making it so even a single item like Riftmaker or Rocket Belt can have its entire QWE combo deal north of 1200 damage. More importantly though, health stacking on Cho'Gath increases a bite of feast, typically reaching anywhere between 12 to 1500 damage in the mid to late game, practically insta-killing a squishy champion. Every stack of feast makes him beefier and more damaging. 3 autos from his E with 10 stacks of feast makes each cast of Orbital Spikes do over 25% AoE max out damage, and of course every munch makes his next munch do more damage. Cho'Gath is as difficult to take down as a tank late game while still having the threat capacity of like a Darius or Aatrox. Even full tank Cho'Gath can do some pretty mean damage. AP Bruiser is just more burst oriented and people like that. Once again though, there's a recurring factor of being tanky but also being a threat. Last example I want to mention is Malphite. This beautiful son of a piece of freaking, you just, God, I hate you so much. Mostly because for some inexplicable reason Riot decided to buff him despite already being in a fairly good position. And they wanted to make him a jungler too, so now there's that. Either way, while he doesn't scale off health like the other raid bosses, he still emulates them in the sense that he brute forces enemy teams through sheer overwhelming stats, only instead of health it's armor. Frankly, the only quote-unquote tank part of him is his ultimate. Everything else he pretty much plays like a juggernaut like Mundo rather than your garden variety tank like Ornn or Sejuani. Once more though, it's about stat conversion. Every point of armor on Malphite is practically doubled while Granite Shield is active by way of his W passive tripling in value while the shield holds. Moreover, Thunderclap and Ground Slam both have noticeably high armor scaling, the latter in particular. I see full tank Malphites doing well over 500 damage per cast to beat. 500 may not seem like that much compared to a mage ability doing upwards of 1000, but it bears repeating that it's on a champion who takes a lifetime and a half to kill without magic damage. It should go without saying that Malphite is beyond the shadow of doubt the counter to physical damage and auto-attacking champions. He gets so much armor that even without Granite Shield, you're staring at a guy with more armor than most champions have in AD. Subsequently, it also means that armor penetration doesn't really work on Malphite all too well since he has so much of it. While yes, any armor penetration is better than none whatsoever, considering he usually has anywhere between 6 to 700 armor by late game, ignoring 200 armor doesn't really matter to him. It'll still take you a while to shut him down. Now on the other hand, Black Cleaver reduces armor, which also mitigates his damage, but to circle back around to the main concept one more time, Malphite's got the endurance of a tank, but he can do the damage of a fighter. The central reason behind players choosing raid bosses over traditional tanks is because at the end of the day, damage is the attribute most conducive to carrying a game. While crowd control makes life a lot easier for people since you have a surefire way to set up into a kill, all the crowd control in the world means jack shit if you don't have the damage to go along with it. The likes of Mundo and Malphite have less hard CC than Maokai or Sejuani, but they certainly do a lot more DPS. On rare occasions, you have tanks with both, like Skarner. Skarner was so obnoxious when he first got reworked because he had the invincibility of Tahm Kench, the damage output of a Mordekaiser, and the crowd control of a Leona all in one. The future of tanks in League, for better or worse, is DPS. Riot essentially dug themselves into a hole by overcorrecting the trauma of tank meta that were essentially right back to where we started through raid bosses. Only this time, rather than making it take longer for you to kill tanks to allow them the opportunity to use their ability rotation multiple times, they just went the other direction, making it take shorter for them to kill you, by making it so the tank doesn't need to wait for his cooldowns, he can just one-shot you in a single rotation. Sion, Mundo, Skarner, Malphite, Cho'Gath, they effectively turned half the roster into Cassante, invincible while still nuking you for thousands of HP. What did they expect would happen though? If everyone can one-shot everyone, tanks eventually would need to do the same if they want to remain a viable class. Now, thankfully for me though, Mundo's one of my favorite champions. Much as I complain about how annoying he is to deal with, I'm part of the problem. So who am I to judge? Anyway, let me know in the comments down below what you think about this whole ordeal, and if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars and join my Discord server, and check out my other tank discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.